Hi, and welcome to another podcast. I am so honored and excited to meet somebody that I've been following for quite a while, but never have had the opportunity to meet. So I have Alaine Duncan here with us to talk about so many things. And before we started recording, I said, oh my gosh, we could talk for days, and I'm sure we can, because I'm already so interested in so many things. We'll try to limit it to as much as we can fit in this podcast. So hang on tight, guys. Hang on tight.
We're on for the roll.
Alaine, welcome. Where are you coming in from? Remind me where you're located physically.
Yeah, I'm in the land of the Anacostan people, near the banks of the Anacostia River, which flows through what is now known as Prince George's County and Mary's Land. So you can see that the names were taken from the colonists that came and took over a few hundred years ago, but near Washington, D.C.
And have you been there for 200 years? How long have you been there?
I've been here about 45 years.
Wow. Okay, so you're on the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm on the East Coast.
You're doing so many things. So many things. You just published your book, Tao of Trauma, in 2019. Amazing. We're going to get into that. But let's start with one of your topics that's going to be at symposium, if it's okay.
Sure.
Polyvagal Theory.
Okay.
A lot of people might go, what is that? And how do we incorporate that into a practice of Chinese medicine, holistic practice? So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So polyvagal theory was one of the things that turned me on to this East meets West approach to trauma regulation that kind of picked me up and carried me from about 2003 or 2004 when I started the Somatic Experiencing training. And this fellow named Stephen Porges developed it, and he's basically made contributions to the understanding of trauma, and particularly the impact of trauma on infants and pre and perinatal trauma. So what he says is that in the olden days, we thought there were just two branches to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branch, what we would call yin and yang. And he says there's actually two aspects to the yin part. There's a yin part that I'm going to translate this through Chinese medicine. There's a yin part that's related to the water element that has to do with shutting down our body when there's too much activation. It helps us, like it facilitates the freeze response. So it helps us, like our houses have circuit breakers that turn off the energy when there's too much coming in to prevent our house from burning to the ground. Similarly, we have a system in our bodies that help us turn off the energy when there's too much coming in so we don't burn to the ground. But he defined this other aspect of how we regulate, basically how we regulate our sympathetic arousal. So sympathetic arousal is like the fight and flight response. It's the mobilization response. It belongs to the wood element in our medicine. And unless it has some way to be mitigated, some way to be contained, we will always be angry. We'll always be angry. We'll be wanting to punch people's lights out all the time. So the primary and most important way that we mitigate the fight response, the flight response, is through our ventral vagus nerve, which is essentially the Shen. It's essentially the energy of the heart. So this is what allows us to have a cordial conversation with our coworker who steals our pens and not go ballistic in the staff meeting and say disparaging things that we regret later. It allows arousal without stress chemistry. It helps us distinguish being uncomfortable from being unsafe. So the person who makes this mistake, well, I'll tell you a story.
I love it.
When I worked for the Veterans Administration in Washington, D.C. for 10 years, I helped establish the Integrative Health and Wellness Service there. And there was one of my guys, he was a 3-time tour of Iraq and had had a head injury and diagnosed PTSD and very troubled, a lot of chronic pain, troubled guy. I'd seen him maybe 3 or 4 times, and he was going to New York to visit his daughter. And the train, he was on the train, on the subway, and the cart got too full. And like many of these fellows, when the crowd starts to impinge, easy to lose it. Mm-hmm. Every other time, in terms of polyvagal theory, he's been unable to access that moment between I'm uncomfortable and I'm unsafe. So he flips into I'm unsafe, wakes up the next morning with his fists bloody, not knowing what happened. But this time, he noticed that he was getting aroused. He noticed his activation. He had that moment in time to notice he was getting activated. And the train stopped and he got off the train. So in that moment, and then the next train came along. It wasn't so crowded. He had collected himself. He got back on the train. He had a lovely visit with his daughter. So this is like the way I think of our medicine as being, or as trauma being vibrational illness. It's a vibration. Mm-hmm. And our medicine as vibrational medicine. Mm-hmm. So he took a vibration of regulation. He found that vibration of regulation that he had found in treatment, mm-hmm. made use of it in that moment. And so he was able to have a lovely visit with his daughter. The New York Police Department didn't have to arrest him. He did. The other riders on the train didn't have to be activated and anxious and alarmed. So what we're trying to do in our nation that has gone through this whole period of isolation and pandemic is help to cultivate that capacity for relationship, because it's the ventral vagus that allows us to see humanity in a person who maybe dresses differently, speaks differently, is of a different race or nationality. Like, we can see humanity when our ventral vagus is available to help us navigate relationships. And it's what the Chinese knew from way back when the heart is, when the supreme controller is sitting at the center of the kingdom, beating out a steady rhythm, our whole system works in a more regulated fashion.
So you're putting a correlation with the ventral vagus system and the heart.
And the heart and the Shen.
Heart, yeah, heart and Shen within Chinese medicine.
So there's these 2 branches of the parasympathetic nervous system. There's the dorsal branch, which I refer to as the water branch. You know, mm-hmm. it's what initiates the freeze response. So it in Chinese medicine terms, it's the water that overwhelms the fire. Mm-hmm. It's the co-cycle that puts the brakes on the heart. And then the ventral vagus is the fire aspect of the parasympathetic. It supports relationship and capacity for connection, ability to transcend, and they both serve to mitigate sympathetic arousal that's too high.
When you treated that particular patient, the veteran, was it 5-element approach to his treatment?
Yeah, I kind of integrate 5 elements with neurophysiology. So I had done a few individual sessions with him, maybe 2 or 3. And then I also developed this model of auricular acupuncture that I call the 12 points for restoration and balance. And there's training for that available on the Acupuncturists Without Borders website. You can access an online training, but essentially we assess 12 points on the ear using a point locator with a digital readout and select the 5 points that are the most active in this person.
Oh.
And then treat those 5 points for 10 sessions and then reassess.
Wow.
So it allows a person to be unique. It recognizes that we all process and digest our stress response in different ways. And it allows someone to change over time, because and therefore the points that they need will change over time as well.
Right. Would you say that at least 5 of the 12 points seem to be the NADA protocol?
Actually, surprisingly, they are not.
They're not. That is surprising.
Right. When we need to do like a large group of people, and we're not going to see them in an ongoing way. At the VA, we were seeing people over an ongoing period, and we wanted to track them.
Yeah.
But if you're doing an acute setting, like there's been a fire and you want to help the people, we use what we call the high five for R&B, high five for restoration and balance. And they are Shen, Men, and Sympathetic, which of course do belong to NADA.
Yeah.
And we do external hippocampus,
Wow.
master cerebral, and insomnia 2. Those were the 5 points that were the most active, most used in about 8 years of serving 80 to 100 veterans a week.
Fascinating. And this training is available on the Acupuncturists Without Borders portal.
Website, exactly.
Are you going to be covering this training in symposium when you're talking about
Probably
trauma?
not. Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
Okay.
We'll do more of the, we'll focus more on integration of neurophysiology of trauma with Chinese medicine.
And there'll be point protocols, different approach.
You know, I don't really go with protocols. I trust people to read the energy in their patient.
Mm-hmm.
I work more on like patient management, relationship building, some touch skills. Because if like there are 2 mistakes that acupuncturists make in treating trauma survivors. One is that a lot of us who are trauma survivors, we manage to hide our dysregulation really well. It becomes well hidden underneath a veneer of successfully navigating life. So sometimes acupuncturists miss what's there. And of course, our skills in pulse reading and tongue diagnosis and interrelationships, really can really help us get beyond the veneer.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a risk of just missing what's really there.
Sure.
And the other thing is people can be so, we can easily overtreat our patients. Like if you follow a protocol and it says doing blah, blah, do, these points, sometimes a person can't really tolerate even one needle.
Right.
If their body is so braced and tight that when we place a needle, there isn't enough space in the tissues to carry the chi. Not only is our needle going to be ineffective, it's going to be painful, it's more likely to bleed, and our patient will not come back.
And it might even trigger
It might even, right.
A recall of that.
And converse is also true. If their body is so flaccid, if their tone is so limited, they're so deficient, there isn't enough tone to carry the chi.
Mm-hmm.
So I found this at the VA. It was uncanny to me. I would needle and needle and needle. They wouldn't feel the needle. There'd be no changes in the pulse, no changes in their symptoms. So I had to develop some ways to help create a little more tone in the system so that the system could carry the chi. And sometimes that had to do with softening tone, and sometimes it had to do with enhancing tone. So I'm more interested in helping people prepare their patient to receive the treatment that they know how to do. I'm fully expecting that Pacific College trains capable acupuncturists who can do differential diagnosis and choose points. But a lot of acupuncture schools don't have this level of training of understanding the arousal and collapse and all of that comes with kind of putting on a different pair of glasses when you look at a patient who's a trauma survivor.
When you say there's specific techniques you develop to soften the tone or strengthen the tone so that the chi can actually be carried,
right?
Is this using manual techniques or manipulation? Is it, are you using sound healing? Can you give us a hint of?
Well, a lot of it is touch skills.
Okay.
Because a lot of patients come to acupuncturists with what I call the strange, rare, and peculiar. Things like irritable bowel syndrome, autoimmune illness, metabolic syndrome, chronic pain patterns that baffle Western providers. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things all arise out of kind of a early, or at least I shouldn't say they all arise. Many of them mm-hmm. have tendrils to autonomic nervous system dysregulation that started in infancy or in early childhood. So these, I would say the majority of our clients come with things that baffle Western providers. And they're more in this world of vibrational illness. They're intangible, they're hard to pin down, they're chronic, blah, 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 blah. Not where I was going.
With like, how would you strengthen? Like, I remember I was taught in school, if somebody's pulse was weak, you could press or tonify kidney 10, and then that would bring the pulse up. So I didn't know if that was one of your techniques when somebody comes in and you now assess, what, there's not, the tone is so soft, they're not going to carry chi. How would you strengthen that a little bit for them?
A lot of my patients wouldn't tolerate me on first blush needling kidney 10.
Yeah.
They can't tolerate a needle, a lot of them.
Right.
So I teach interaction skills to help someone feel safety in relationship is key.
Yep.
So we have to create safety in relationship, which is part of that has to do with boundaries. Like, would you like me this close, or is it better if I'm this close? Where should my chair be? What happens when I'm at the sweet spot? Oh, I can exhale. Okay. So now we can talk. Now your chi is returning to your body in a more regulated way. I do a touch technique I call the kidney adrenal hold quite a bit. It's with permission, of course, sliding the hand under the low back and allowing that kidney, which tends to come up like this when we're anxious, everything lifts up, and that adrenal gland that's sitting on top of the kidney is shoving up into the diaphragm and squirting out adrenaline. And then our neurologic platform is consistently in arousal and fear and a threat response. So if I can hold this kidney like it's a newborn babe and kind of tell it, you don't have to do it alone. We're going to be here. And then in time, it will sink into my hand. I'll start to feel a pulse moving through it. It perfuses with blood. It comes off the diaphragm. Person takes a deep breath. All of a sudden, they're in a different neurologic platform. And when I needle them, it's going to go into more regulated tissues that can carry the chi.
I get it. And that's the kind of, those are the techniques you're going to share at Symposium, that we can use that in practice. These are things that we aren't taught, actually. We're taught tongue and pulse and diagnosing that way. But like you said, there are two big mistakes acupuncturists make in treating trauma. And honestly, I could probably say everybody's been through some sort of trauma, especially when it goes way back to infancy.
Right.
And these are some tools that they can use in practice now to allow the patient's body to receive
what treatment we have to offer. And what our core philosophy, our core theoretical foundation is balance and regulation between opposing states of energy. So we are a gift to humanity that is suffering so much from traumatic stress. Traumatic stress, it's the foundation for war, it's the foundation for violence, for domestic violence, for child abuse, for all these things that human beings suffer. And we make errors, we make mistakes. Sometimes they're regrettable. Sometimes they can't be fixed. So the more that we can help people who are really frozen, and unable to access their heart because the dorsal vagus has consumed their brainstem, has consumed their frontal cortex, like this tension between the kidney and the heart has consumed capacity for nuanced thought, for relational solutions, all of that. These people can make really bad mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
And they're making them daily.
And then their children follow suit, and it becomes ancestral.
That's right. So, and even as you mentioned ancestrality, I think that the whole study of epigenetics of trauma, like we can understand that as Jing disturbance, that gets transmitted through the Jing. And there's wonderful research about helping children who have, many generations behind them of trauma. Like if they're given opportunities to build resilience and build capacity, that history of trauma actually turns into expanded capacity.
So it becomes a gift.
It becomes a gift. It becomes a contribution to being able to manage the stressors of life instead of something to collapse around.
How wonderful to be witness to that transformation in your
Right.
patients.
Right. Totally.
When you work with somebody, just like the veteran that you mentioned, how long typically do you work with them before you really see significant changes? And they also recognize the significant changes, like that veteran you worked
Right.
with, he would originally have punched somebody out on the subway or on the train. In this particular time, how long had you worked with him before he
I only
found
treated
himself?
him like 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think the issue
Powerful.
is people feel something. I tell people that they'll know in 3 or 4 sessions whether this will be helpful to them.
Mm-hmm.
Then the issue becomes, how long can they hold the treatment?
Yeah.
And their body's going to need to have reminders.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of think of there are trestles underneath our tracks, and sometimes we go through around a curve and we need the trestles a little closer together. And sometimes we're on the straightaway and we don't need the trestles quite so often. So, some people have stayed with me for years and years, and some people have had a dozen treatments and they're satisfied, they're done, or they come back a couple, 3 years later, or
When they're going through a curve.
when they're going through a curve.
I love that analogy. I absolutely love that analogy because it's so true. That is an analogy that we can all use with our patients, because a lot of times patients will say, well, I feel pretty good now, so should I come back? And that's a great analogy to say, hey, when you're going through a curve, you might want some more support. Come on in, tough time. You're going to go see family that often triggers you or something like that. Wow, what a great
analogy. There's layers and layers in our lives too, that we may peel off one layer and we feel pretty, we're pretty good, but then another layer shows up that wants some attention, needs some attention.
I would imagine. So tell me, if it's okay, would you tell me a little bit more about the book you published in 2019, The Tao of Trauma? Does I would imagine it describes all of this that we just discussed about polyvagal theory and how to use that.
So I'm gonna tell one more story about polyvagal theory.
Yeah, please.
Great. About a week before all the references were due to the publisher for the book, I said, what the heck? I'm little. Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, he's big, but what's to lose? I'll just write him and ask him if he'll write an endorsement for me.
Yeah.
So I sent him the table of contents and the introduction and the chapter on polyvagal theory. And he wrote back within a couple of hours and said, Alaine, thank you for building a bridge between polyvagal theory and Chinese medicine. Of course, I'd be happy to write an endorsement. And by the way, I took a closer look at your chapter on polyvagal theory, and I made a few corrections. I hope you don't mind. That was great. That was great. So the book. So when I first started the Somatic Experiencing training, which was in like 2004, one of the first lectures was, this is what sympathetic is, and this is what parasympathetic is. And I went, bing, I got this, right? This is yin and yang. And then as we went on, the fellow who developed Somatic Experiencing, his name is Peter Levine. And he's an ethnobiologist and a psychologist. And he, in his younger years, 20, 30 years ago, went out into nature and studied animal predator-prey relationships. And he watched what happened and noted that in spite of being constantly under threat, animals in the wild do not develop symptoms of PTSD. They simply don't. They have a self-regulatory mechanism. And he also broke down the steps of the threat response into 5 stages. So the uncanny thing is that those 5 stages mirror the 5 elements of Chinese medicine.
That's so awesome.
It's so awesome. So I renamed them to be a little more consistent with our medicine. But the first step I call awakening arousal. It belongs to the Po and the metal. We need to recognize that there's something new in our environment, and our animal nature, our instinctive nature allows us to, the ball is coming, lift up my hand. That's the instinctive nature of the Po, awaken arousal. Then the next step is signaling threat. So we notice there's something new, and then we notice that it's a threat. That's the kidney and the adrenal and the water element. So that message flows with adrenaline. And actually, the first thing it does is it goes up to the pericardium, it crosses the co-cycle, and asks for help from our tribe. We are essentially tribal animals, and we seek help from our tribe. Oftentimes, that resolves the trauma right there with the help from, with having capacity for relationship. You stole my pens. I don't like it when you steal my pens. Can we talk about it? You know. However, if we've experienced relationship-based trauma in the past and our pericardium is not so functional, our ability to open and close those gates, or the trauma is such, like it's a tsunami or a hurricane or a fire, where no amount of relationship is really going to help us navigate this, then the heart gets penetrated. And we know the sacred chamber of the heart does not want to get penetrated. So when it does, it sends out a command to the whole kingdom of the body. All the fire trucks need to come out, life threat. And its message goes through the 5 Shen to all of the elements. Mm-hmm. And its message to the kidney is to send the chi up to the liver to mobilize a response. So the liver then mobilizes a fight or flight response that's commensurate with the level of threat. Not too much, not too little, commensurate with the level of threat. This is a balanced system. It also sends a message across the co-cycle to the earth to shut down peristalsis in the guts, because we don't want to take energy to digest that cheeseburger. We want it all in our muscles and limbs in order to be successful with the fight or flight. Yeah. Ideally, that's a temporary situation, and peristalsis returns when success is achieved. Mm-hmm. Often when it's pre and perinatal trauma, and this message has to be delivered repeatedly, that capacity for peristalsis is compromised, and our ability not only to digest our food, but also to digest our experiences is compromised. Mm-hmm. So after the wood, then, if the wood is successful in mobilizing a successful response, it then sends a message to the heart that I call restore coherence. So the heart's job is to first send out this message via the blood pulse to send everybody into alarm. But then its second job is to restore equilibrium. To receive this message, it's over. When I was at the VA, there were all kinds of guys who wore their ball cap with where they served in Vietnam across the front, and they would sit in a coffee shop and talk forever about what happened 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. Their heart spirit did not know that it was over. Mm-hmm. So knowing that it's over and knowing that the heart can restore coherence, that's its job. And then it will then come over to the earth element, whose job is, I call it, digest the gristle. Mm-hmm. Because no matter how successful you were in going through these 5 steps, there's still some gristle. Sure. There's still some challenge. So the stomach and the spleen, their job is to break that down, assimilate the lessons, harvest the lessons that are in there, and then send the rest of it down to the colon to be eliminated. Yeah. And then we're capable to go through another round. We're ready to notice something new in our environment without that capacity being tainted by, I'm frightened of blue trucks because a blue truck ran into me once. So I'm always vigilant for blue trucks. Then we're not able to really notice arousal in our environment because we're hyper-focused.
And that whole cycle had never been fully completed.
That's right. So the other thing that Levine said is that if we make it through all these 5 steps successfully, we won't have symptoms of trauma. So we know that 2 people with the same automobile accident, the same street crime, the same surgical procedure will have very different responses. Mm-hmm. So our job as acupuncturists is to help people find success in the element where they were thwarted, where their patient was thwarted. And if we can achieve regulation in that element, then the whole cycle goes round and round, and symptoms disappear. So that we have this framework of the 5 elements gives us a leg up on most mental health providers who don't have the benefit of the corresponding tissues, corresponding organs, corresponding emotions, tastes, right. All of that we have that allows us. This person was thwarted in their wood wood. They didn't get to complete the punch. That punch is still in their muscle tissues. So then I know that issues about orienting to space are going to be important because the eyes are associated. I know that tendons and ligaments are going to be impacted. I know all kinds of things. So I have lots more window in and ways to access more nuanced expressions of how trauma is stored in the tissues by virtue of knowing the correspondences of the 5 elements.
Right. So when they come in and they have elimination issues, you can see where the breakdown in that co-cycle occurred.
Exactly.
And you can treat it very specific to
That's
where
right.
the breakdown occurred versus, other ways that it's approached is just the same for everybody.
Right. So in that way, a protocol-driven treatment doesn't really get you home.
Right. Exactly.
You have to treat the person who's in front of you who had this experience and was thwarted in this way. And then you can be very successful in a fairly short period of time.
So most everybody, I want to say most, because some people were not affected by 2020.
That's right.
But many people were. So that right there can be something that we can offer the world really right now, because there was a lot of trauma around there. What other types of trauma have you seen in your practice and been witness to the transformation? There's the PTSD from that veterans experience. And you said that a lot of it is from infancy. What are some other just kind of typical traumas that we might see in practice that we can apply these tools?
So first off, I prefer the term traumatic stress response to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
So to me, what traumatic stress response says, there's a range of responses. It's not one thing. That it, to qualify for PTSD, you have to have experienced or witnessed death or near death. There's a lot of requirements that are kind of useful in a court of law or in disability benefits in the DOD or the VA. But a lot of us experienced trauma as a small child that had to do with emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Or had to do with unavailability of a parent, death of a parent, right. Imprisonment of a parent. Lots of things that don't meet that rigid quality, but still created autonomic nervous system dysregulation.
Sure.
So, and the other thing is that PTSD has that D at the end, that makes it seem like it's a life sentence, like it's a permanent disorder.
Yeah.
And it's not. We are hardwired to respond to stress, but we're similarly hardwired to return to regulation. Yeah. Just like that rabbit that gets chased by the fox that doesn't end up with PTSD.
Yeah.
At a certain point, the rabbit says, I don't hear a fox. I don't smell a fox. I don't see a fox. I must be safe. We tend to go a little too fast. We trip and fall down the stairs, and we don't take time at the bottom to say, well, I don't think I broke a bone. I can breathe. Let me just catch a breath here. Like, we get up real quick and hope no one saw. So we don't take that moment to experience in a somatic way that we're safe, like the rabbit does. So one definition of trauma could be too much, too fast with inadequate support. So then as a clinician, if we can slow things down, break it into bite-sized pieces, and offer relationship and safety and support, we can kind of tease out this experience of too much, too fast without adequate support. And all of a sudden, a person is able to take a deep breath and able to find themselves in their tissues and, sleep at night. And, and once someone can sleep at night, everything is better.
I think one of the things I'm just writing down and really absorbing right now is the fact that our medicine can help with this. And
absolutely,
I usually teach that stress is the foundation of all disharmony in the body. I mean, I could pretty much trace any disease and go back, and there's stress at the root of that. Almost everything, even an accident. Oh no, my broken arm is from an accident. Well, it's because you were stressed out. You weren't paying attention, right? But honestly, it's like you can almost say the same thing, that behind every illness or dis-ease of the body, there's probably some sort of traumatic stress response where we acted too fast, too much, without adequate support. And the beauty is our medicine can offer that support by finding out where the proper stress response was broken down in the co-cycle, and then connecting it and completing that cycle. So
helping people complete their stress response.
Yeah.
We could call it their self-protective response.
Yeah.
Complete that self-protective response. Yeah.
Fascinating.
You know, when our medicine was developed, 3,000-4,000 years ago, the 7 causes of disease, it was all about weather, too cold, too hot, too windy, all those things. But today we don't really suffer from, most of us.
Yeah.
Most of us. And so most of our illnesses are of this kind of more subtle vibrational place where our body goes into dysregulation and then isn't able to cope.
Yeah.
So that could be anything from an automobile accident to a surgical procedure. I'm very interested in medical trauma. Certainly, war trauma. But then there are also what's I think we're getting more awareness of the the word just escaped me. The insidious insults, particularly marginalized people experience, that are little razor cuts that are constant and create a level of arousal that I think plays a major role in health disparities in our public health system, along with the epigenetic impact of 400 years in the case of African Americans, maybe 200 years in terms of Asian and Pacific Islanders, 400 or 500 years in terms of Native Americans, but that these epigenetic impacts, that we can name the disparities in healthcare provided today as one aspect of those disparities, but I also think we have to take into account the history of trauma.
Yeah.
And the epigenetic impact, and vibrational medicine is required to reach that.
We practice vibrational medicine.
And we practice vibrational medicine. So our healing actually in the cosmology of Native Americans can go forward 7 generations and also heal backwards 7 generations.
7. Wow.
I mean, that's the folklore from Native culture. I don't know how I don't know what the numerology of 7 means in that language, but in that culture, but we can go forward and backwards. We can impact life. We have a very, I like to say, our nation needs its healers.
Oh my gosh, more now than ever.
We need lobbyists, we need educators, we need attorneys, we need to rewrite laws. We need educators. We need all those people, but we need healers.
Oh boy.
We could change, for example, the law around the police use of chokeholds. But when a police officer is feeling frightened because of white supremacy and racism, that law is on the books will not change their behavior when they're consumed by the use of their brainstem to think with instead of their frontal cortex.
Right.
So we have to change the capacity to recognize discomfort from fear. When we are in life threat, we need to be able to mobilize a response and defend ourselves. But when we're simply uncomfortable because we've been socialized in a certain way, we need to attend to that and not, to use the words Resmaa Menakem uses, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, blow our anxiety through someone else's body. Right. Yeah. We need to deal with our own anxiety and find our own regulation. in order to be the human being that we want to be for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. And
Yeah. Wow. Powerful, powerful. It almost takes us right back to the first story you shared with the VA, the veteran that you worked with, who otherwise, without any treatments, would have
beat somebody
not
up.
even recognized he was going into fight or flight
That's right.
on that train. But now he has the ability to recognize, okay, wait, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I recognize that in myself. I'm going to make a different decision.
Right.
And it's not it's not an unconscious decision. He's become very aware and conscious because he was able to complete the cycle.
And his self-esteem changed too.
Yeah.
He would say, now I can be the person who my parents raised me to be. My parents raised me with certain values.
Yeah.
You know, and that's who I want. I want to be who the son my parents raised. And now he can.
Wow.
So that's healing his parents too, right?
Healing his parents. And the image that came to my mind was when a trauma is experienced, the Shen scatters, kind of like birds on a beach. All of them kind of hang out together, and then a little kid runs and scatters all the birds. And that's what happens to our Shen when we experience a trauma. And as practitioners, we help call the Shen back in, like all the little birds back to the beach, so they come back together and sit and rest in the sun, right?
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
he's able to do that and feel safe to go out in public. I would be fearful to just even go out in public, not knowing how you're going to respond to anything. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to go out because what if it gets crowded? I don't know how I'll respond. Instead, it's like, I think I'll be able to respond fine because the last time I was able to leave the train and
that's right.
Different
So that confidence gets built.
Yeah, so powerful. So that must have come from the Somatic Experience Practitioner training that you did in 2003. What drew you to that? Was it just continuing education or?
Well, this whole journey started with hearing parents of Lance Corporal Jeffrey Lucy on the radio. And he had come home from Fallujah and was, I'll just use kind of shorthand, he was unable to live with what he'd seen and what he'd been asked to do, and committed suicide in his parents' basement. And his folks were beautiful people, are beautiful people. Dad's a nurse, mom's a social worker. They advocated for their son. They, blah, blah, blah. The VA blew it. They should have kept him on a locked ward and they didn't. And so I was kind of filled with, gosh, acupuncture could have made a difference. Yeah. But at the time, I knew nothing about military culture, and I knew I had been in practice for 15 years by that time, but I didn't feel like I knew enough about trauma. Yeah. So I sought out the Somatic Experiencing International Training and brought their training program to Silver Spring, Maryland. And we've now trained several hundred people in that model. We have ongoing annual classes going through the area. And it was, it was through the course of that training that I got, all these wonderful interfaces that where, like my book explains, and in my courses, I really enjoy the integration of things that seem to be opposed to each other, and where they come together, something new emerges. Like Chinese medicine teaches us that too, that something new can emerge when you bring opposites together. So like when I got that sympathetic and parasympathetic was yin and yang, and these 5 steps of the self-protective response were the 5 elements. And then I took some postgraduate training in use of touch, and that was when I could see, like, people will discharge thwarted responses down meridian pathways.
Wow.
And the officials of the body will speak they will emerge out of this kind of work. And then, I just wanted to give that away, so, it was 10 years at the VA, and I did some teaching at the VA with the clinical staff there. And then I left the VA in order to write the book and did some training exclusively with acupuncturists. And then I opened that training up so that now acupuncturists, medical providers, body workers, mental health people are all welcome at my trainings. And I call them the Tao of Trauma. And I'm starting a new series, one in Silver Spring and one in Ojai, California, this fall.
Awesome.
And people can find out about that at integrativehealingworks.net. And we're also, for the first time, doing an online, a virtual cohort. So if you live too far away or you're not vaccinated, I'm asking everyone who attends in-person classes to be vaccinated. So
you have the Tao of Trauma happening on the East Coast, and then Ojai, California on the West Coast, this fall, starting this fall?
Starting this fall. It's a year-long course that meets 5 times in each of the 5 seasons. We look at each of the steps of the self-protective response and some touch skills that are related to the corresponding tissues and organs of that particular step in the self-protective response. So and it's a mixed class with, like I say, body workers, acupuncturists, mental health providers, some medical people. So we learn from each other, and we practice on each other, and we explore all these really important issues for our nation and our communities.
I love it. And the Tao of Trauma training incorporates somatic experience, being able to use that and incorporate that into your practice, whatever your practice might be.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I teach somatic experiencing because that's a, registered trademark,
right,
all that kind of stuff, But I teach an East meets West version of
the
restoring
bridge.
balance. Yeah,
the bridge.
That's right.
Yeah, you have created.
That's what I try to do. Yeah.
I'm looking also, you have other classes. You have using the diaphragm system to restore balance. Do you still teach those classes as well? Are those recorded offerings?
Some of them are recorded. The diaphragm system work is recorded on the TCM Academy website. No, I'm sorry, that's on the Pelvic Academy website. There's a shorter course, shorter than Tao of Trauma, that's on the TCM Academy website. It's called Revolutionize Healing from Traumatic Stress. And that involves a combination of live Zoom classes and some pre-recorded material. And then I'm always showing up on some podcasters or somebody invites me to talk about something, and you put a quarter in me, and I just
I want to make sure I say this right now. Just thank you so much for saying yes to this, because when Pacific College said, "Who do you want to interview?" I was like, Alaine. I want Alaine. So nice. When you said yes, I was like, yoo-hoo. So you've got.
There's also a bunch on my website. There's a drop down called In Alaine's Voice, and it has a series of podcasts that I did for the Somatic Experiencing Institute on each of the 5 elements, and a number of other podcasts are on there. That if people wanted to hear my voice or hear what I had to say before the symposium happens, you'd be welcome to drop in there. And I also publish a monthly newsletter. I call it News and Views on Integrative Healing. I offer tips on treating trauma and various opportunities for learning an East meets West approach.
And we can sign up for that on your website, integrativehealingworks.net. I can sign up to get the newsletter, get the tools and tips for trauma.
Yep.
And it says also consulting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk with any. I do one-on-one consulting with clinicians who want help with thinking through their patients or thinking through this material. And I'm also happy to work with institutions and organizations about setting up approaches that are more sensitive to the needs of trauma survivors. I'm interested in systemic and opportunities to have a systemic influence.
And by working with practitioners, which you're doing more of now, I know you have a small private practice, you've held that, but you're more into providing these tools to the practitioners that are out there with their 100 to 200 patient base. So in essence, you are spreading these tools to tens of thousands of people in your teachings, with your courses, live.
That's certainly my hope. I mean, I'm in the kind of the earth phase of my life. It's time for me to share my harvest, and it just feels very meaningful to me to work with younger clinicians and hopefully inspire them to get in the flash, and get in there and
absolutely
engage in community programs and stuff.
I think we've kind of established every one of us has gone through some sort of trauma. I mean, we all have experienced
That's right.
something like that. And many of us probably are still living, whether it's ancestral trauma that we inherited, but it just hasn't had that complete closure. We can help with that. You can help a practitioner help their patients with that. They can come see you at Symposium. You're going to be there. I know
Yes, please.
this year, 2021
Mhm.
at Pacific Symposium. You have the workshop in the morning lecture. They can buy your book. And you shared with me a little secret that you're going to give them a discount for your book at Symposium.
Yes, when they actually, it's available now when you register. I know I gave the information. I'm not sure where it is. I should study that. But my publisher, North Atlantic Books, is giving a discount to Symposium attenders on the purchase of the book. And it's available in print and in audio and in electronic forms. So
I love it. I love it.
Anyway,
I see it. It's on your website, integrativehealingworks.net. They can also come and join your upcoming Tao of Trauma training that's starting in the fall, either East Coast, West Coast, or online.
Yep.
And is there any other secrets up your sleeve? Anything else I mean, that's a lot. I don't even know how you're doing all of that, but in case there's any other way that people can contact you, they can consult with you one-on-one.
Sure.
Ways that you're engaging. Do you have other?
There's a link on my website to sign up for a consultation. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. If you have questions about the upcoming course, I'm happy to receive an email or contact us on my website. Alaine.Duncan at integrativehealingworks.net is a good email. I love to talk to people. So give me a call or pop me an email if you have questions or reflections. And we're all just learning this bit by bit and from each other. Yeah. So I'm really interested in creating a community that can share and learn from each other and make an impact on our world. I'm also, in the spirit of cultural transformation through healing, I'm offering a 25% discount to BIPOC, LGBTQ, and first-generation immigrants in all my trainings. Okay. So I'm really interested in stirring up the pot a little bit, and cultural transformation has to start with healing. So we need to arm the people who can reach out to the people who need it the most. Yeah, awareness and healing, and you're providing the tools for that. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so 25% off if you're a member of one of those groups. Okay, guys, just a summary, integrativehealingworks.net. We did not cover everything I would have loved to talk about, but like Alaine said, if you go to her website, integrativehealingworks.net, you can find other podcasts where she's gone in depth on a lot of these topics and maybe even talked about more. You can see her at Symposium. You can join the group or just contact her and see. I'm sure she's going to be doing more trainings, more conferences and symposiums in the future. And I hope one day to meet you live and in person. That'd be great. Yeah. I'd look forward to that too. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. You too. Bye, be well. Yeah. Bye-bye.